Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'm here with good friend George Alexopoulos, aka G Prime 85 on Twitter and various other sites where you can look at his art. He is the author and artist for Mary Sue, which is a graphic novel that you can get. And is there a new one? Is there a new crowdfund going live, or is that coming in the near future?
Yeah, it's actually up on Kickstarter right now. I have volumes 1 and 2 up available right now.
Okay. Let me see if I can get a link for that at some point in here, and I'll put that up for people to take a look at. And we're going to talk about today is what I call the indie struggle, and what George calls the indie struggle, which is how do you do this? How do you do this creative work without anybody telling you what to do and without anybody giving you money ahead of time to do it? Really just no oversight and no company pipeline that you're working through. And that's kind of what I thought it'd be fun to talk about today. George, as an artist and as a writer, does something kind of unique in that he does a lot of his own printing. And by own printing, I mean, I don't mean like people say, I might say, I self-publish. And what I really mean is that Amazon publishes my book. They're the ones who print the book up and send it to you. I just give them a portion of that sale, right? I don't really publish it myself, but George actually does, which is very unique.
Yeah, there was, I don't want to like jump into the whole of, I don't want to like hog the microphone or anything. So please stop me if I do. What ended up happening was I've printed books through third parties before, my self-published comics. I've been doing it for like 10 years. And I had realized what they use is digital printing. So it's basically the kind of printer that you would, if you go to a Staples print center, you got the big ones that are kind of Xeroxy, they can take paper up to 12 by 18, something like that. And I had used those before because I used to work at a print shop. And I had realized once I had crowdfunded my most recent book, the one right before this, which was Mary Sue Volume 1, I took the money that I earned from that and I said, why don't I just buy one of these printers and ship it to my house, and I can just make the books from home. So long story short is it's the same exact printer that they would use if I had used my third party. And the only difference is that I can do things like color correction immediately. I don't have to.
Yeah, you have to wait for a proof to come in and realize that all the blues are off. Yeah,
and that happens frequently, especially with my most recent book, because I had to calibrate the printer and there were so many different calibrations that I had to do. Like, I don't know if people know, but when you paint in RGB versus CMYK, printers use CMYK printing. And anyway, but there's all these color differences and you have to do all these adjustments. And if I had to use my third party printer, it would have been back and forth so many times and they would have shipped me new copies and it would have cost so much money. So the advantage is that, I don't know, I can control everything from the paper stock to, I mean, I can control everything. The only downside is I have to assemble the books by hand, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot of my customers appreciated the DIY flavor of it. So it was a lot of fun. It was super challenging, a lot of labor, but actually it was really rewarding.
Yeah, so going on to the RGB topic, so I'll just explain this for anyone that's not in working in the digital space as far as like making art or book covers, because I make my own book covers and that's just something I do. So the way that you see light displayed on a display is a combination of red, green, and blue, and these actually kind of trick your eyes into seeing the full spectrum of what is visible light to some extent. And so if all the lights are on, you see white. And if all the lights are off, you see black. That's kind of how RGB works. Now, technically with LCDs, that's kind of a reversal. I'm really thinking in CRT terms, because in LCDs, full on is black, but I don't need to get into that level of detail. When you're printing something, it's more like mixing paint in art class, is that all the colors is black, right? You actually know black is a separate ink, but all the colors is dark brown.
Yeah. And
then there's 3 primary colors. So the 3 primary colors for paint are different, and which means that when you shift to that, that space for a printing, you're going to see some different colors. Even though I tried very hard to make sure like all my books were very well color corrected. The colors are just very slightly off on, like on this book, for example. This ended up being a little bit more kind of yellowy, whereas in the original one, there's just a slight orange there because of trying to change that color space around, even though this is a pretty colorless one. It just happens, right? There's a little bit of a different way that those colors end up coming out. And the drivers that are involved with the printer in creating that also factor into that.
Yeah, and every printer is different. So if say I calibrated my files for my printer here, if I had to send these same files to a third-party printer, I would probably have to recalibrate the images again, or they have to do it over there. There's a million different tricks. Like I actually had to physically change every panel in the whole comic to fit this. I don't know. This isn't the right way to do it, but I manually had to fix all the panels this time around. And I don't know, the driver is acting weird on this printer. I actually would not recommend this one for anyone else.
It's finicky.
It is. The only reason I bought it is because I've worked with this manufacturer before.
Okay.
So I trusted them. But in the future, I'd probably get like an even more expensive ultra powered one if I really want to take this to the next level. Because they have some printers that will do your not cutting, but stapling for you. That's really handy. That'll save a lot of time. I think I shipped 500 books a couple of months ago, and we had to cut and staple all of them. It was fun, but it took a lot of time.
Yeah. And so this is another reason why I'm always looking for fulfillment that is hands off for me. And there's a couple reasons why I'd look for this. The big one is I want to spend my time writing. I want to spend my time creating or making content. I don't want to spend my time like physically making books. Yeah. That's just not something that I want to do. So I need someone else to make the books. And I also don't want to spend my time mailing the books out. I don't live in the city. I have to do a lot of driving to mail things. And I also have 2 young children. So for me to go to the mail, just to go to the mail or to the post office is quite an ordeal. Mm-hmm. To get like a 10-month-old baby out and a 4-year-old and like a bunch of boxes. I've sent books to people. Those of you who've gotten signed books know that that's a labor of love for me to go down to the post office and actually like just send off a parcel or send a media mail is quite a lot of trouble. So I need to not do that. And so having some company that specializes in that is very, very useful to me because that allows me to spend all of my time working on the creative output. And I have very, very little time to work. Most people don't realize that I only work 1 to 2 hours a day. Never more than that, except I have a couple extra hours on Wednesday to do these live streams and a couple extra hours on Saturday to record most of my YouTube videos. And that's the way I work.
Wow. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
No problem. I mean, this is my time. This is my time to talk to you.
Thank you.
It's great. So I do have up on the screen one of George's comics. This is actually Mary Sue #2, which you can check out. And one of the things I like about this comic is these really brilliant colors. There's a whole lot of color that you use in every panel. It's very bright. It's very flashy. There's a lot of high contrast involved, both between the colors and between, darkness and lightness. And I like that your colors are very different from what I would call the modern comic approach to colors, which is these like gradient shading that occurs across parts of characters' bodies over kind of light inking, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I like yours is more like a digital painting, which I appreciate.
Yeah, it was interesting to sort of come to this conclusion production-wise. I'm sorry, I'm so excited to talk about this. I'm stepping over my own words. I could have done the traditional pencil, inking, coloring, all that stuff and all those steps. But then I realized that would take maybe 16 hours per page. Mm-hmm. And that's not really, I can't live off that. So I had to find ways to sort of reduce my time, if I could, to 8 hours per page. So I completely skipped the ink step. And I developed a sort of pipeline where I just do pencils. And it's sort of like I used to do concept art for video games, actually, indie games.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Oh, sure. It was a very similar process when all you have to do is slam out the image as fast as possible and then get, whatever, the art director, whoever, the client, to see it. And then if they approve it, you can go and polish it up if you have time. So my goal early on in the drafts with these comics is to just sort of draw them as quickly as possible and then go back and see how much time left I have per page to just polish them. And it was hard because I had to tell myself, look, this panel may not look perfectly polished, but we have to move on. It's sort of impressionistic, like the Impressionists. It's like the idea is getting across. The colors look good. The panel is pleasing to the eye. Let's move on, because it's not a key panel. No one's going to really stare at it. They just want to get the story, move on.
Yeah, it's more about the story. And this is something, and I don't. I think I have some books in the back. Anyway, this is something you'll notice about classic comics, anybody that's paying attention. So the panels that are part of what I call just story movement rather than what are called key panels, which are these big splashes of an important action, they're usually much lighter on the detail, often missing a background compared to the other panels. So one of the problems, I think, with modern approaches to comics and why a lot of artists have trouble keeping up with the paces that, say, like John Buscema and artists of yore were able to keep up with, is that they're attempting to make every single panel some Baroque masterpiece. And this was a problem with artists all the way going back to the 70s. I talked to Jesse White about this with some artists that really were trying to be very Baroque with every single panel, and that's just not what you can do with comics that you're trying to put out every 30 days. It's just not a workflow that's going to work well. No,
it's not healthy, really. Having done it, I mean, you have to ask yourself, how many hours a day are you willing to sit at your desk doing this?
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're a super ultra expert and your panels look amazing, you have to ask, like, is 16 hours enough? If you're working 6 hours a week or 6 days a week, I can't do that. It's not healthy. Yeah. And for what? I guess for pride, for bragging rights, to say my panels look so good. But I come from the manga background, so my thing is, it's very much about, I mean, how many seconds does anyone really spend looking at a panel? Maybe a few seconds at most.
Yeah.
And maybe later they go back and study. But manga is all about speed.
Mm-hmm.
And
so, like, yeah, here's a couple of good examples. So we could see this blue guy. Don't leave me behind, boss. You notice the background. It's really an impression. You have a gray field it's letting you know that there's buildings. This is actually something that you would see in a lot of Silver Age and Bronze Age Marvel comics, because you didn't have time to draw all these complicated backgrounds if the panel was just to show the emotion of the character and have a dialogue bubble. Why would you spend time on that? You just don't. You have to decide what's important. What's most important is going to be, what's on the character's face. This crying blue monster. I mean, just like that's really what it's about. And then showing the emotion and moving on towards the next action. So this is something that I noticed too.
Yeah, comics, especially when it's been called low resolution. Like, I'm only trying to pack, all right, let's say words and pictures. You pack them together, and the reader is able to sort of upload their own interpretation, or like they're participating in the story by reading the expressions on the characters' faces, let's say, maybe even thinking about what are their internal thoughts, and they're sort of filling in a lot of blanks. And that's why I think kids are so drawn to comics also. Even if I can't read English, or let's say I can't read Japanese very well, I can still understand what's going on in the story by stitching together between the panels. How does, let's say I'm, flipping a coin with my finger and then I catch it. I'm able to, in my imagination, see the coin flying through the air and landing. So you're actually, in a comic, of course, you're engaging the audience on multiple levels, the visual and the imagination, and presumably they can hear the dialogue in their heads as well. So you're actually, there's like multiple, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly. There's a lot of bandwidth there. One panel has a lot of information to unpack, and it's being read very fast. So it's interesting to see sort of like the American version or the American style of comics. Like, let's say Watchmen, for instance.
Yeah.
I was just looking at Watchmen the other day, and each page is so dense, and it's almost kind of it's almost tiring to read because there's so much going on per page, and my eye doesn't find any comfortable places to rest. And that's one of the big criticisms from Japan. By the way, I love Watchmen. I'm not saying anything bad about it. But Japan, a lot of them say they look at American comics and say, there's nowhere for my eye to rest on this page. It's so noisy. And a lot of
noisy is where it is. So this is a thing with a lot of modern artists. Now, Watchmen to me is very old.
Yeah.
But if I look at some modern artists, a lot of them, I don't know if I want to name names, but their panels are so busy you can't even see what's happening.
Yeah.
If I have to sit and stare at a panel for a story for more than about 5 seconds to figure out what the hell is going on, that to me is a problem. And that actually goes against some basic art principles. And again, this is something that if those of you who are watching me talk to Jesse White, classic panels will have negative space in them. That is space where there is not a detailed, focused action. In other words, the action occurs in 1/3, say 1/3 of the frame, the bottom third, and then the top is where there's speech bubbles and just nothing. And when you have a panel that is every part is filled in with some extremely specific detail, again, your eye doesn't have anywhere to rest. You're not directing the eye towards the details which matter. Rather, you are confusing the eye and asking them to figure out which details matter. That's not what you want to do.
Yeah, that's tiring. Mm-hmm. I mean, not every production cycle is, ideal, but what you want to try to do as a creator is guide the eye across the page.
Yeah.
You're always thinking about composition. Ideally, not always with American comics, but you're trying to, even with the word balloons, you're trying to arrange them in a certain way where the eye naturally flows. Okay, panel, character, goes across the page, makes a Z shape. You go up to the next page, make another Z shape, something like that.
Yeah.
You're trying to do that. But yeah, it's always been, I don't know. I don't want to be a jerk and say American comics are like inferior or anything. I grew up with Japan manga, so that's just my preferred style.
Well, I mean, manga is what's killing it right now. Hi, Roll. Good to see you here. I forgot to say hi to everybody that's streaming. I think I saw Edwin here, so good to see you here. Rusty and Jared, it's good seeing you every week. I love seeing you in the chat. Larry, of course. Kino Corner. I will check out Kevin Smith's tweet about replacing Christianity. Let's see what else we have going on here. And film and fantasy fan, comment in. Yeah, I'm glad that you guys are here. So make sure if you want to say something to me or to George, tag me in it. Say at David Stewart, and that way I know to pay attention to that message. Right now, slow chat is on, just so you know, and the reason that's on is just to prevent any flooding, because I had an inkling there might be some flooding tonight. But I can turn that off. I'll actually turn that off right now, so we won't need slow mode for a while, and I could always turn it back on if it becomes a problem. What are your thoughts on the visual styles of Alex Raymond and Dave Stevens in their comic art, especially Raymond's Flash Gordon and Stevens's Rocketeer?
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Are you familiar with them, George?
I'm actually not. Just the Rocketeer movie, but that's it. So I've seen the original Rocketeer, and I think that's what I'm thinking of. Is I'm gonna Google it just to make sure. Mm-hmm. I always think of Art Deco when I see him.
Yeah, I'm gonna Google it just to make sure I know what I'm talking about, which is the classic Flash Gordon ones. So these are great examples of what the classic art styles are. And I'll just let me see if I can go ahead and put up a couple of panels here for you guys. So here's one. And so one of the things you'll notice now, just ignore the messy color printing. This is because of the way that you used to have to print colors. Sometimes they end up outside the lines because you can't line up the plates exactly. Mm-hmm. So you don't judge on that. But if you notice the way the line art works, there's only lines where you need the details. And so if you look at a lot of classic American comic art, this is really, I think, the ideal of what you want to go for. Rather than, now this guy's really hairy, so he's probably not the best example, but maybe the girl is. Notice there's really no lines on her face. The lines are just showing the details of her face. The more lines you add, the older face ends up looking. And this is from the classic illustration style. This is not stuff which is really taught today, and really you don't see it a lot in modern comics, which is a pity because you can get so much detail out of this basic. See, people see a panel like this. George, you can see this on your screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so people see a panel like this, and they think, well, it's not, a new panel is so much flashier, and this is very basic. It just has characters standing around, but it supplies all the information you need. You can see that these two officers have this stern look on their face. You can see a basic background. You can see what matters is in bold. Like, this is a very efficient way of conveying story. And believe it or not, a lot of modern artists cannot draw in this style simply because they've never learned how to ink only the details. So inking is kind of a lost art. I've kind of gone around with this, and I'll maybe do some content on it at some point. I'm not an inker or an artist per se. Like, my mom is an artist, so she taught me. But one of the things that has been lost over the years is the ability to ink in this way that produces these high contrast shadows and really just gives you the details that you want to see. You have to think that the old printing technology was poor. You can only show so much detail in a small panel, and your color printing was also going to be bad as well. So getting the key details was more important than having all of this kind of extreme, Baroque detail.
If I recall, also, I was reading a book called 10 Cent Plague, I think, and they talked about, also Charles Schultz talked about this. When they would hand off coloring to whoever was at the printing shop, they would just assign certain numbers, like like paint by numbers, put this color on this person's face. So there was a big space between the original illustrator and whoever did the coloring. So the lines the lines and the in manga they call them betas, the fills, like the black areas. That stuff had to be very, very clear. So here you see amazingly strong, very well composed panels, so that the colorist could know very quickly, okay, so I'm just going to put this color on the tentacle on her jacket. Flat colors, but it ended up looking very pleasing.
Yeah, I think so too. I really appreciate this kind of style. Now, I think one of the things is that, you develop new tools, and so you tend to want to use them. And my problem with a lot, and it's not a problem, it's just, it's not my preference to have a lot of the modern, what I call gradient. I call it gradient shading. I just don't have a better word for it. The modern colors where you're sitting in Photoshop creating these gradients across different sections of an inked drawing. It always looks off to me. It's like you're trying to get to this painted appearance, but it never quite gets there. And it's like you're trying to duplicate the process of watercoloring and ink drawing, which is another thing that is in kind of classic art styles, which can be very beautiful as well. It's to layer those watercolors. But instead of doing that, what you end up with is like these, I don't know, these they look very artificial and really too digital. And one of the things I like about your art, Alex, is because you're just in the digital space coloring, it doesn't have that gradient look. It looks like a painting. Like there's not just like, let's look at this guy's shoulder here. Rosemary, do me a favor, won't you? Go poach someone else's eggs, will ya? I love this. This is very manga to me, by the way. Like whenever someone gets upset, they like their nose bleeds.
Yeah. It was, oh man, I wish I could do infinite pages to really, really flesh out the jokes, those kinds of jokes.
Yeah. So if you look at something like this, because this shading is painted on, it's more like a real painting. I mean, it is a real painting, but it's more like you were actually picking up a physical brush and doing it on a painting style. What you get now on his shoulders, you'd get literally you drop in a gradient You section off a section with a layer and drop in a gradient to produce this in a fake way.
Yeah.
And I see this over and over again, and it just looks really awkward, but it's very popular in modern American comics. And I guess readers are okay with it, because otherwise you probably wouldn't see it. But it just never looks right compared to just painting. So I think, either you're going to go with, to me, my preference is I like the classic colors, or you can do a painted style, but you kind of got to pick. That's my opinion.
It's an interesting observation. What you just described, probably, like, let's say I did the painting on the shoulder or something like that. I can do that because, let's say I had penciled lines on his shoulder and all this shading and everything on the pencil layer. But then when I did the painting layer, I decided, this would look better without any lines there at all. I have the right to destroy my own pencils. And I can
this is a good point. Yeah.
Right. So I'm the only artist on this comic right now. But if I was working in the American assembly line method, if I was a colorist, I wouldn't have the right to destroy the inker's lines. I would have to use something called a color hold, let's say, maybe. That's pretty popular these days. A color hold is when I take the black lines of, like, say I was shading someone's face under the nose or something. Mm-hmm. I can turn those black lines into color.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too. But I actually am not a huge fan of that. Well, I don't know. I'm not a fan of it, but I see it a lot.
It's one way around this problem, because I don't know if there's a rule or something. You're not allowed to touch or destroy the inker's lines or something like that. But obviously, since I'm the only artist on this project, I can do whatever I want. I can repaint and paint as many layers as I want to. But what really that means is I'm not married to my line art. If I want to get rid of it, I do. And I think the most fun is I actually don't overdraw my pencil layer anymore. I just draw enough so that the figure, like just today on Twitter, if anyone goes and looks, I was drawing a picture of Marie falling off the edge of a ship, and it was just penciled outlines. And then I started doing the next step, which is called flats, which is just putting down chunks of color that I can select with the magic wand, and then the real painting begins. Once I've assigned colors to the whole scene, I can really go nuts and let myself paint and have fun. But there's a lot of setup before that. So that's why a lot of people say I have strong colors and stuff like that. It's not because I know what I'm doing. I just let myself experiment with different colors during the flats phase. And then I say, okay, this is pleasing to the eye. Let's go with this.
Yeah.
And then when I paint, like, let's say painted clouds, that's always a lot of fun because you can never go wrong with clouds. But
yeah. So this is something when I watch colorists work. So I decided I was going to watch, modern colorists work a lot, and they do a lot of work to produce all of those colors in a modern comic, and flats are usually part of that process as well. So that's interesting. I mean, I find this workflow just a much more interesting way to approach this medium. I always say, one of the things you'll find in my new book, which is called Keys to Prolific Creativity, you guys should pre-order it. It will be out in March. It has a bunch of information for just people of every creative sort to design a creative process that's going to serve your needs. But the last key that I mentioned there is break the rules, which is you have to get out of that classroom mentality that there's one way to do things and that there's a set order to do them. And, if it's your book and it's your, or if it's your music or whatever it is, it's yours. You can do whatever workflow you need to work. You can do whatever you need to do to make the product be what it wants to be. There's no reason to stick to the way that everybody else has done it in the past. Like, there's just not a reason. You can do it your own way that works. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
I mean, as long as one of the first things they teach you for the brief amount of time I went to comics school is clarity is the most important thing. It's even more important than what the art looks like. If you can read the comic clearly, then you've already succeeded. And then on top of that, whatever flourishes and frosting you want to put on the cake is up to you. But yeah, if you can clearly tell the story, even with stick figures, and it's fun to read, then everything else is gravy. So that's when the fun of experimenting can come in. Like, I actually, I have a tutorial on my channel that I have I did this process of I would paint in black and white, and then I would colorize the image. It's not the most ideal way. It's not the most ideal workflow, I should say, but it's one method that is viable. There are a couple of panels in the first few issues of Mary Sue where I did this, but they ended up looking a little more muted than I would have liked. So I ended up just some panels I do in black and white, and then some panels I just start in color and stuff like that. But there's a lot of experimentation I allowed myself to do because on this project and many others, speed is more important than the finished image. I don't think most readers, no one has ever come to me, at least not yet, saying like, oh, this panel looks so weird, it ruined the entire experience for me. Like it's like a pebble on the railroad, it derailed my entire experience. Nobody said that. So as long as the comic is, a smooth reading experience, like who cares? Like most people are just, I mean, I hate to talk like this. I don't mean to sound like I'm lazy or anything, but it's like, if I can get by with a B+ on most panels, I'm okay with that.
Well, I mean, so here's another thing too, is that people often create what I call a false dichotomy between quality and quantity.
Yeah.
And I call it a false dichotomy because the reality is you have to do it well and do it on time. A book that's never completed doesn't exist. Yeah. Any effort you work towards with a book that never comes out to be in front of somebody's eyes is literally a waste of your time. So you have to be working towards completion at all times. And if you're not, you're wasting your time. So that's number one. Number two, the great artists of yore, they did high quality and high quantity. Johann Sebastian Bach used to write a cantata every single week. That's a lot of composition work to do in a single week, but he did one every single week, and he performed every single week. So it was not, it's not impossible. John Buscema would draw and ink an entire comic every month, and have time left over to do other stuff. So if those guys can do it, and all of the greater artists of the Marvel of yore were capable of doing that. They knew that their process, they knew what mattered for their process, and they knew how to get through it on time and of the appropriate quality. But I'll also put it like this, if you're looking to grow, you are going to grow best by putting out more stuff. So if somebody's like, I'm going to make the perfect comic, and it never comes out, it doesn't exist. But let's say you take 10 years to come out with it. It's going to be a real culture shock when people say it sucks, because somebody's not going to like it. So you can't make it perfect, but also you won't know how to actually improve unless you're doing lots of iterations, lots of practice, doing it over and over again. If you spend 10 years writing your first song, it's going to suck no matter what, compared to what you would have done if you'd just written 100 songs and let the first one go and be what it was. It's your first song. It's okay. It's not going to be the best thing you ever did. You just make it as good as you can in the time that you have, and then you need to move on. And I talk about this in the new book. It's really important to understand that if you are not doing things on time and under budget, you are not a professional. Things have to come out on time. And if I were a comic artist, if I were George, I'd rather come out with 6 or 12 books a year than come out with one book every 3 years.
Yeah, it's hard too. There's there's so many aspects to this. So for instance, even in writing, they say to get the first draft finished. I'm sure you know all about this. Like I'm preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
The first draft, you have to just get it out as fast as possible. Don't even try to polish it.
Never be editing while you're drafting.
Right. Because there's things that happen when you're almost subconsciously writing and drawing too. Things happen that you didn't expect or even plan for. And then later you can, when you're sober, in air quotes, you can go back and edit yourself. Or what did they say? Write drunk, edit sober, right?
Yeah. It's just, I do both sober, but you draft with your, you want to have your heart and your passion in your drafting phase. And then when you edit, you're cutting it down to the details that are important, fixing things that don't work with the final product. And the better you get at that, the less editing you actually have to do. A lot of people don't realize this. It's like by your 5th, 6th book that you come out with, your editing time should drop significantly because you're just better at writing. You know how to write a better story by that time. So you don't have to worry so much about making the story perfect because you're going to get closer to that perfect story every time you come out with a book. You're getting better every single time you do a new one. And so it's like, again, it's kind of this return to the academic belief. If you ever took an English class and made you do like 4 different drafts of an essay, it's like, that's not real world. Real world is you got to write the article tonight. It's published tomorrow. You don't have time for 4 drafts. You got to figure out how to do it right the first time. And really, it'd be better to write 5 essays than to do 5 drafts of 1 essay. You're going to get better by doing 5 essays than doing 5 drafts of 1. So getting your output pumped up is the best way to get better at what you're doing. And this is the case, whether it's in every discipline I've ever worked in, this is the case. If you want to get better quicker, you got to pump up your output. You got to do more stuff. It's not about perfecting that etude. If you've been playing guitar for 2 months and you're working on this etude and you want to make it perfect, make it as good as you can make it, move on to the next one that challenges you, because you're not going to be, you're not going to be making your maximum growth by trying to perfect something before you're even close to knowing what perfection even is.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my lecture. Let's take a look at the chat real quick and make sure I don't forget the people that are here. Rusty Heckler says manga is better not due to art, simply it serves its market. I tend to think that that's a really good point. I'm not going to say better, because I think American comics also serve their market, but they serve one market, which is people who like superheroes. It's very little other stuff coming out of American comics other than, the random kind of like Alien versus Predator sort of Dark Horse comic that comes out. But manga, you get a lot of stuff. You get like high school drama manga. There's fetish manga. There's sword and sorcery manga, like Berserk. There's all kinds of stuff. So manga has lots of markets that it serves. Any thoughts, George?
Yeah, I'm always surprised. I live in New Jersey, so I'm spoiled. There's a million Japanese bookstores around me, so you can go and see the different genres that they have. There's, cooking manga. There's something about, what do they call it? The Drops of God. It's a wine tasting manga. I've seen when I linked this on Twitter. It's just people eating. Yeah. But there's like weird soap opera stuff. It's amazing. But what I love about it, and all right. So I was in high school in the early 2000s when Tokyo Pop was blowing up and translating. There was a lot of translations coming along, and I read a lot of shoujo manga, which is like teenage drama, like romance and stuff like that. And as a guy, I was never interested in superhero stuff, but I thought the shoujo comics were so interesting because they really gave their characters room to grow and breathe. And of course it was like, oh, does she get the guy and all that stuff? Which guy does she get with? And but I was like, wow, I've never read a comic about this. And slowly they were translating more and more comics. There was Blade of the Immortal, Berserk, of course.
I have that one I'm going to do some content on Blade of the Immortal, which is great. It's a good one I'd recommend. Huh?
That ended? I think it ended recently.
I don't know. I haven't read all the way through it, but it's pretty good.
Oh man, it was nuts. I read it. I tell this story all the time. I used to cut high school to go to Midtown Comics in New York City when I was 15. And I would get on the bus and go to Midtown Comics just to get new Blade of the Immortals and Vagabond, pulp comics like called Strain by Ryoichi Kagami. And it was really adult stuff. And I was like, I've never seen any comics even remotely like this from American creators. And it just blew my mind.
The closest thing I could think of to Berserk from American comics is like when Magneto rips the adamantium off of Wolverine's bones. I thought that was like a jump the shark moment in comics, but it's like this is so violent.
Yeah, it's funny because I never. All right, so you got the big two, DC and Marvel, but then I was more interested in things like alternative. Image, Spawn was really hot when I was a teen.
Dark Horse stuff was what I bought a lot in the 90s.
Yeah. 90s. I didn't know that Sin City existed, but I'm sure I would have loved it if I'd known. But that stuff was hard to find, at least where I lived. At the usual mom and pop shops, I couldn't find those books. It was mostly superhero stuff. I would have to go to New York to find that stuff, and I would have to ask for it.
Yeah, I would find that. I would find a lot of it. There was a couple stores by me where I would find this stuff, and my sister really liked that kind of stuff too, I remember. But it at the comic store, it was all just the big two for the most part. And I saw the disappearance of comics from basically every venue besides comic shops. They used to be in drugstores. They used to be a bigger thing, and they just kind of they disappeared from the main stage. They left drugstores. You can't find comics. I used to be able to buy whatever the latest X-Men was at the drugstore.
Yeah. And that's a major difference between America and Japan also, because you can go to a 7-Eleven, there's manga everywhere. Every shop corner has it. And part of it is also because they're such a concentrated country, there's pretty much nowhere you can go and not find manga. Whereas in
people
America,
have them on the news. They're at the newsstand, so people pick them up for their train ride, and then sell them later. So there's like a used book turnover with it too.
Yeah, the magazines, you're not even supposed to keep them. They're printed on newsprint. They're supposed to be thrown away. It's the tankobons, like what you would find at Barnes & Noble. Those are for the collectors.
Yeah.
But especially in Japan, like there's such limited
like Shonen Jump, or that's always the big one that people like to talk about.
Yeah.
But you're right. It is on newsprint. Newsprint's another thing that I want to talk about at some point on the channel. Sure. But let me get some more chat stuff here. What do you think is one of the best eras of comic book art? What do you think is the best?
Well, I can't answer that. I mean, got. Oh, sorry.
I'll talk about my favorite is probably late 80s. I'm not sure what they call that era. Like late 80s, Marvel and DC. You still had all the great inking. You still had a lot of great artists. You had a lot of dynamic panels and things. But you still had the good classic stories. It hadn't gotten totally soap opera yet, which is kind of what happened in the 90s. So I think that's probably my favorite. The printing quality's better. I'll do some content with some comics I have from like 1991, some Spider-Man comics. The printing quality is really high. Art quality is really high. But after that, you start to get into this soap opera style of these 6-issue series that like nothing happens in.
There's no consequences.
Yeah, there's nothing, just nothing happens.
I know.
Ron Leonzi has a super chat here. What if I told you that I made a short film? You could find it under Defeat the Witch short film. Do watch it. I'll watch it. If you have like short films or stuff, you can always anyone that's watching, not just Raw, you can tell me about that and I'll try to watch it. I do like short and independent films, especially people who are able to do good things on a low budget. That's a particular interest to me right now because that's, I think, going to be the key to breaking up the weirdness of Hollywood. Just having some people who can do things without having to use lots of money to do it. And that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. Anyway, George, what's your favorite era? Do you have a favorite era?
I don't know. I mean, if you look at individual artists, I recently bought a Frank Frazetta book of his like ink work.
Yeah.
And oh man, he was a god. And I mean, what was he? 70s, early 70s?
Oh, he was very productive all the way from the 60s or maybe 50s, all the way through. Yeah, he did. He's very famous for all of his paintings of like John Carter and Conan the Barbarian.
Oh yeah,
those are just some real classic pieces of art. In fact, here's some Frank Frazetta right here on this cover. So let me show this to you.
Yeah,
Conan. So I just love how he constructs his paintings, and his line art is equally good, but it's obviously different techniques. So he almost takes a grotesque approach to the anatomy, just like really showing the details of the lats on Conan here and the snake. And then again, negative space. And it's just kind of a wash of impression back here.
Yeah.
Not details. Just like, I guess it's skeletons, maybe some monsters. We can't really see them well, but that's not the point. The focus is this action scene of chained Conan getting ready to get bitten by the snake. How's he going to get out of this?
Yep. His, oh man. I mean, not to say he's part of an era, but I feel like somewhere between that and the comics code ruined. I always have a chip on my shoulder about this. I think the comics code, I mean, no surprise here, like set us back 30 years. The rest of the world advanced with comics, but we couldn't do edgy stuff like Frazetta's. I mean, that stuff was all hidden under the newsstand. You had to ask for it. You didn't even know. You had to know that it existed. Stuff like heavy metal, let's say.
Oh yeah, I loved heavy metal.
Man, if I had known that it existed when I was young, like I couldn't ask for it because my parents would know, they would have to buy it for me, let's say. But it's like, oh, if I had only known like that Mobius existed. I discovered him real late. But there's so many different movement. Jeez. I want to say late 90s Japan, early 2000s was a great time.
Yeah.
And a lot of artists use digital stuff now, which I mean, I'm speaking against myself.
I think even Kintaro Miura went to digital at some point, which is why like Berserk, one of the reasons Berserk slowed down so much.
I wonder.
I heard he went to a digital process. I'm sure he did. Because it's a really intense story. That takes, people don't realize that like writing things like horror, it takes something out of you. It's not always a pleasant experience. So when I wrote my last horror book, it's called Eyes in the Walls. You guys should buy it. It's 99 cents on I don't know where I have it. I have piles of my books over here. I have piles of my books. And some Conan books and stuff like that. This guys, if you don't have Savage Tales of Solomon Kane, you guys got to get this one, okay?
Oh man,
I'm gonna have a book coming out this year that will please fans of Solomon Kane. Anyway, this is the horror book, Eyes in the Walls. I only can write like really late at night, so I'm writing horror really late at night about monsters. This is not the best thing to sleep, but this actually helped my creative process because it taught me to do something really important that I didn't realize I was screwing up on, which is I was not taking the time to consume art. And I'll talk about this in the new book, Keys to Prolific Creativity. In order for me to write this book, I had to write about 1,000 words at a time to 1,500 words, not a whole lot. Then I had to go and read something else for 30 minutes or play a video game before I could go to sleep. Otherwise, I would be too haunted by my own writing. And if you guys have read this and gotten to the ending, you'll know why this was such a disturbing thing for me to write. It always takes something out of you to write things which are disturbing to me. So being able to disengage from that, take some time after you finish your work, go read a book. So like I got the Berserk Deluxe. So I went and read that. I read Twilight. I read a Twilight book. I know I've done some analysis on Twilight, but it's really just something stupid to make me not think about horrific monsters touching me at night.
Well, it's true. I mean, all right. So I was thinking about doing my first adults only comic recently. I've never done one before. It's not that I've avoided the content, but I've never had my name attached to a project like that. And I thought it would be an interesting challenge, but seeing the sort of things that I am willing to draw and the depths of which I'm willing to let my imagination go, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of scared of myself.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting. I'm more scared of people sort of seeing it. It feels very exposed. Like, wait, George has some dark thoughts, man. And then like, I don't want family members to see it and like think like, oh, he's messed up. But like, I also really want to explore that stuff too, because I think there's a lot of richness there too. I don't know.
Yeah, my recommendation is if you feel that you gotta express something on that level, you should do it. But be aware that because it affects you, because your art affects you back. It's really a conversation you're having with yourself. It sounds very weird and kind of woo-woo to say that, but it really is that way. You're making the art first for you, and so if it affects you, then it's probably pretty good. But make sure you schedule time in whatever your workflow you're using to just go consume something that's different from that. So I specifically avoided horror. I love reading horror usually, but I'm not writing horror and then reading horror. That's not a recipe for like a sound mind. So I would write the horror and then I'd go play like, I'd go play Final Fantasy. Sure. Final Fantasy game or like play Fire Emblem or something. Like open up my 3DS and play Fire Emblem for a little while and just like unlock some character dialogue, something really light.
It's funny. It's even during the day. There's a channel called Lazy Masquerade. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
Oh, he reads. It's a guy with like a British accent, and he reads like scary YouTube and Reddit stories and stuff like that. And I'll listen to him during the day, and I will like piss myself with fear just looking down a hallway. And like, I can't imagine listening to him at night.
Yeah,
But
this is
it's
something.
still
It's something Stephen King said. He goes, the secret is you don't describe the monster. You point at the dark corner and let the
yes,
reader create the monster themselves. And
yeah,
this kind of goes back to something you said earlier about the comic being more about an impression than about some. Now, of course, here's a much more detailed panel, which looks great. By the way, this is a great looking panel. I love the
nice.
colors, and also this contrast between this pink, slightly huing to orange through green over to this purple blue indigo. That's always like a good like if you just unfocus your eyes, you can see it's just divided into two big colors. That looks really good. So yeah, I forgot where
The reader's imagination can fill in those blanks. Like I didn't have to draw every leaf on those trees.
Yeah,
Everyone
you draw
knows
the
what a tree
trees
looks
and
like.
they get that it's a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
But
get
that's
what it
cool
is.
because it creates a conversation between, let's say, I mean, the word medium, right, means a bridge. So it's my mind going into the panel, going to the reader. So that's the medium, the comics medium.
Mhm.
And now there's like a conversation going back and forth. I draw this picture, and then you put your imagination into the picture, and now we're having a conversation. It's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. So let me look at another one from chat. I highly recommend people check out the original Little Nemo comic strips by Winsor McKay.
Yeah, those are gorgeous.
Yeah, I haven't looked at those in a while, but yeah, it was done in 1905.
Jeez.
It's hard to think of. It's hard to think about the workflow back then. It was so much harder to print things back then.
I don't even know how they did it. I mean, have you
So-
seen Gustave Doré
Yeah.
stuff? I mean, those were etchings, but I don't know how they reproduced ink.
I don't remember the whole process, so I'm not gonna say too much on it. But we talked about the critical having those specific detailed lines. That was important. If you look at, say, Tolkien did line work for his books.
Yes.
You look at them; it's quite simple because it would have to be transferred into a plate that would press it.
Right.
So it could really only be one color. You had to just refine it just down to the details, and that was what was important.
Someday I'll have to get into that too. I was actually recently learning how to do hardcovers, and
yeah, I need to get into that too.
it's so fun. I mean, I didn't know like stores like Joann's and Hobby Lobby existed. I never went inside them, but then when I realized, oh, you can buy leather hardcover stuff, you can buy bookbinding materials. I don't know
I bound a book for my wife
of
like stuff I wrote for her back when we were dating, and it was a lot of work. And it didn't come out that great, but
it's really valuable to have that handmade quality, right?
Yeah, it is. So if I did it a few more times, I bet I could do it. And that could be a super premium product as well.
I've been thinking about that. Yeah, because I don't have a ton of readers, but I think the ones I do have are really interested. Like they were really excited by the homemade aspect of the comic stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyway, that's something I do want to get into too. It's like maybe putting out some hardbacks of some of my more popular stuff.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah.
It's not as hard as one would think. It's just there's a lot of tools that we probably don't even know exist that we have to get used to.
Yeah. From Commodin, thoughts on sitting literature into comics, especially on how to cut or render long monologues, if at all. Good examples, recommendations to analyze both the book and the comic. So off the top of my head, you got to work in the medium that you're working in. So monologues are not very good for comic strips. And you can tell that when you see some modern Marvel and DC stuff where they'll use a 9-panel page. And each panel is basically a tracing of the next panel with like one detail altered because it would be to do this. And I don't fault the artist for this. People call the artists out for doing this. I'm like, why would you make the artist redraw the same face 9 times in a row? But that's the only way to cut up one of these monologues, right? Is to cut it up into these pieces in this 9-page thing. So ideally, you just avoid that. Now, what Stan Lee would have done is he would have used just a couple of really large bubbles and just not had a monologue, had to be broken up by action, do more of the storytelling with the visuals and less of it with the dialogue. If you're trying to adapt Atlas Shrugged into a comic, it's not going to come out very good. Right? She has these like 6-page monologues that are just, they're great. I mean, it's like an essay on her philosophy, but that doesn't work in a comic book format. And it wouldn't work in a movie either, because you'd be listening to somebody talk for like 10 minutes about, it's just a speech in the middle of a book. Now it works okay in the book, I guess, but it probably would not work in a comic. So my thought is rethink what you're doing.
Well, like you said, you have to play to the medium's strengths. It's very similar to, like, say, a video game adaptation into movies. A lot of people that make the movie adaptations, they don't actually play and understand the games.
Yeah.
So I was even thinking about, as an example, let's say, if I'm going to, I mean, all right, show don't tell, right? Everyone knows show don't tell. But in a comic, you can show even harder than, like, let's say I want to describe how depressed I am and I can't even clean my room or get dressed. I would just draw clothes everywhere and a dusty room and garbage everywhere. And I don't even have to write a word. Everyone can infer my state of mind from the illustration. So when you make a comic, I would think, there's actually a lot of reduction. I cut so much dialogue between the script and the final product, because I realized, like, I don't have to have the characters say anything most of the time. It can be in their gestures. I mean, even something as simple as that scene right there that we're looking at. Her posture can say so much about whether or not, like, if I cross my arms, that means I'm feeling defensive, maybe. Mm-hmm. Or if I have her hands behind her back, that means she's feeling confident. There's so much you can do with body language, expressions, and that's why I went with, in this case, a kind of a cartoony style. I want to be able to have characters really be expressive, even to the point of caricature. Some of her faces sometimes are really, really distorted.
Yeah, and this is a thing with Manga.
Like there.
That I like, because the big eyes and the exaggerated features telegraph emotion.
Yeah,
in a way that is great. It's an exaggeration. It's a style. Yeah. And the styles have purpose. I think people who don't like to see styles, I don't know.
Well, let's say if I wanted to go with a serious Frank Frazetta style, I couldn't make her emote like that. It wouldn't feel the same way.
Yeah. You wouldn't telegraph the emotion. It wouldn't be as obvious as what's going on. The other thing with classic comics, you'll notice, like if something by, say, John Buscema, is that when he needs to show the emotion on a face on a panel, it's just the face. It's just the face, because that's the only way you're going to see those details with that style. It's like if you get that face nice and big. I think a lot of modern artists lose that. So they're trying to draw all the details on a tiny panel. You're just going to lose sight of what's going on, especially, especially in a small format if somebody's reading it digitally.
Yeah. I mean, there are a million tricks, cinematic tricks. And we say, like, actual cinema, not like, popcorn flicks, but like,
yeah,
the silent movies, especially silent movies and manga are like brothers. Their roots are the same. The DNA is the same. But what they would do is, I mean, look at old German expressionist films. They would move the camera. They would do all kinds of weird angles and lighting, and it would support the action happening in the story. Or, I don't know, you want to zoom in, zoom out, use keyframes. And there's so many different tricks and things like lighting. Like, for instance, in this scene, I can spoil it for people. I hope they don't mind. This character, the guy there, has a dual nature. He has a secret. So in that whole scene, his face is always in shadow. And I did that intentionally. So there are these little tricks that I don't know if people are picking it up, maybe the first time they read it. But if they know his story and go back, they realize, wait a second, he's almost always facing away from light as if he's hiding something. So there's all these little tricks. I don't know if anybody picks it up, but I think that goes the extra step with these kinds of, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so George Lucas would say like you want to make a movie. He wanted to make movies that if the sound was off, you would still be able to understand what's going on. You can
Yeah.
do a lot visually. You have to think about the medium that you're in. If we're talking about games, that's a whole nother thing because people try to tell too much story, I think, with games when
Yeah.
games need to be about gameplay, and it should be gameplay, aesthetics, and then story.
Hmm.
So if you try to put story first, you're probably not working in the medium right. It needs to be gameplay first.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the Dark Souls style of storytelling.
Yeah. Just kind of completely indirect.
Yeah, I mean the whole world. There was one. I'm so sorry to talk about Dark Souls. Probably
It's
not
okay.
good. There's one boss at the end of Dark Souls 3. There's these two guys. One guy is way in the back and he's crippled, and his older brother fights you on his knees, and he drags himself across the floor with his sword, and he's not allowed to stand up. I think because he's trying to emulate his crippled brother, something like that.
Mhm.
And none of this is said at all in the story, but if you actually look at the floor, you'll see scratch marks all over the floor from when they were dragging themselves across the floor. And it's like that kind of storytelling is everywhere in these games. The environment tells so much story if you just stop and realize, oh wait, like these are not just randomly placed, like that pillar is broken. Why was it broken? Who broke it? There's a story in the environment itself. It's so incredible.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good way to think about that game. And a lot of games where there is that amount of detail in the environment. But I actually don't have a problem with like the opposite, which is something like, so people criticize Final Fantasy 13 for being totally linear. I'm like, that's not a problem.
I see.
It's a linear story. So of course the gameplay is going to proceed through environments in a linear fashion.
Mhm.
That's not necessarily, I mean, Castlevania is linear too.
Yeah, I guess it's the big challenge was the execution faithful to the intent? And I worry that things like, all right, 13, that's a whole other conversation, but like, I think something was lost in the translation. What they were trying to do and what actually happened, I think the fans' expectations were in a completely different place than what they were delivering.
Yeah, I mean, I like Final Fantasy 13 on a number of levels. I think their problem with story, that's a whole nother conversation. In fact, I'll probably do some content on it. But Final Fantasy 13's problem was in how they executed the story. Really, the order in which they placed the elements. They went with character melodrama rather than making the plot happen correctly in the correct orders and in ways that people understood what the hell was going on. So you don't really know what's going on till like 3/4 of the way through the game. That's like 50 hours of gameplay before you have a clue what the hell is going on in this world that you're in.
Yeah, I remember they were trying to go for they were looking at Lost, the series Lost, as a sort of template, and every time the characters would get into some kind of deep thing, deep character drama, they would be like, "Oh, we have to go. We're under attack again. Let's move on to the next scene."
Yeah, well, Lost. I find Lost unwatchable. So to me, that's not a good. That's not a good template. All right, let me head back to chat. Raul says the story of my life, manga, not Marvel, was comics for me. I get that too. I don't get the hate of manga from the West, other than maybe it's jealousy or something that people like it. So they should do more stuff that people like.
Well, what's weird is I think a lot of younger people grew up on manga. So I don't know how old you are. I think our age-ish.
Yeah. Well, I noticed it when I was teaching high school, and now I haven't taught in a couple of years now, but the last job I had before I decided to just be creative full-time, or really be a full-time dad and be creative. But all my students, they read manga.
Yeah.
None of them read American comics. I never saw an American comic. I saw lots of manga volumes of various kinds, including ones that weren't school appropriate, like yaoi manga and stuff like that. Yeah. I like catch girls with yaoi manga. It's like, you're not supposed to have this at school. It's like, you know what this is? I'm like, yeah, I know what that is.
It's funny too. Yeah.
Clearly your mom doesn't know what that is.
They want to consume this stuff. I mean, manga in general. They want stories. They want comics. They're just not getting the content that they want.
Yeah,
That's actually, I was experimenting with, sorry.
That's a great point.
Yeah, like the Mary Sue comic, for instance. Like I wanted to deliberately make a female main character so I could sort of, because I know there's this untapped lady market, let's say, in American comics at least. Like one of the big criticisms back in the day was that a lot of the female main characters in superhero comics, let's say, have a sort of pandering flavor to them. Yeah. Which, as like I grew up on manga, so I'm cheating, but like no, I know how to write a good female character. I've seen it done. And the American comics creators are not doing it well.
Yeah, now it's just more like a feminist caricature. It's like you'll have a like female Thor fight, I don't know, female supervillain, and they're not fighting. Instead, they have a long conversation about the importance of female strength and then go their separate ways.
These are not characters. They're just mouthpieces. That's not why you get if you go to any Barnes & Noble, you'll see kids, teenagers, young adults, sitting in front of the manga section. They just want a good story with characters they feel like are either interesting or, oh, this is me.
Yeah. Hardwick Bentho says there used to be more variety in American comics as well. For instance, Archie comics used to be big. Some of the humorous comics still live on in newspapers, and that's true. That's true. And again, I think it happened in the 90s. There was this big shift in the 90s in the comics industry towards soap opera superheroes, and it pretty much killed the industry long term.
I mean, there were a couple of times when indie comics, it looked like there was a minor renaissance coming along. Like, this is emo, but like Blankets by Craig Thompson and Scott Pilgrim was huge during its heyday. There's a lot of black and white alternative types of comics that are boned by Jeff Smith. Excuse me. There were a lot of series like that where they were trying to figure it out how to make those comics mainstream. But because of this is another topic completely. The American distribution system for comics is broken.
With diamond distributors and.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. You have to sell at least 2,000, something like that, 3,000 copies just to get your book distributed by Diamond. I would have to manually go to every comic shop in my area, give them my books and say, hey, do you want to sell these on consignment? Which is what I've been doing, but it's very labor intensive. And by the time they take their cut, I make no profit. So it's like, what's the point?
Yeah.
I don't know how to fix this aside from now everyone's like doing crowdfunding and there's like a minor renaissance there. So we'll see what happens.
Well, let me, now I did tempt everyone that I was going to have some major news for indie writers, and I want to get to that in a second here. Let me say something about crowdfunding too, because I think a lot of people have, so I think that there's a little bit of a show being put on by a lot of crowdfunding, and this is not you. This is a lot of others that I've seen, and I'm a clever person. Some people think I'm clever, anyways, and I tend to be able to quickly tell if something is amiss. And so one of the things you'll notice in a lot of these crowdfunds is the number of backers and the amount of money that's being posted do not line up. So a lot of the crowdfunding that you see is actually not meeting, it's actually not, at least initially, meeting the goals. The creators are putting money into it to make it seem like there's more interest. Or they're either doing it through like a friend or something like that because you want to get this idea that it's popular by showing that it's funded, so people want to buy into it. But I think a lot of people actually don't make any money on this stuff because they don't realize how expensive it is to actually print the book and mail it and do all of that other kinds of stuff. And that's why we've had so many fulfillment problems with indie comics over the last 2 years, is they don't realize that mailing out all this stuff is a little bit time intensive. They don't realize that it costs a lot of money to print things and have them mailed to you and then to mail out to other people. Just like everybody's kind of groping in the dark thinking, and you may see a big number. It's like, man, this made 50 grand. And so people are cued to think, well, that person has $50,000. It's like they may have spent $60,000 fulfilling the crowdfund. Mm-hmm. Some people are not doing as well as you would think that they're doing.
No,
Just
it's like
put that out there.
My first campaign for Mary Sue on Indiegogo, I think that was back in like August or something. let's say it got $13,000. That included shipping. So when people paid for international shipping, I paid thousands and thousands of dollars to ship my books to like Australia, Europe, Canada, all that stuff. So my profits, like if I added up all my backers, let's say 300 backers, and they all paid shipping at least $3 to $10 or something like that. And the international shipping can go as high as 30. They included that in that $13,000 total. So my actual profits were way lower than 13,000. Plus I had to pay for printing. I had to give Indiegogo their fee. I have to pay taxes on that.
Yep.
I'm barely paying for food, you know. It's actually an amazingly, like, I don't know. It has to be such a passion project for people, but also there's a lot of surprises that come along when surprise costs.
Yeah.
Things like boxes, you have to actually take time.
Yeah, whatever else you're going to put it in.
Everyone takes a cut. And then I want to work with retailers, but they take a massive cut just for existing.
Yeah.
Like 30% or something.
Yeah. I mean, and so this is why I try to go with that print on demand. I just try to do demand workflow. So I put the book up for pre-order. You can pre-order the ebook. Yeah. It just means that like I have a landing page ahead of time. Some people choose to pre-order, other people don't. And then the print book is available a couple days before that pre-order. And from then on, I'm just trying to sell the book constantly until I'm dead. And it doesn't cost me anything to sell an extra copy. It doesn't cost me any time. All the time is front-loaded in the development of the book. That's why I really like the print-on-demand workflow. Mm-hmm. And I think more comics guys should get into that. I know John De La Rose is doing it, but I think a lot more comics people should get into it, because this is how you create a market. Is that, yeah, there may not be a whole lot of people in your little town, wherever you happen to be, that are really interested in your comic. But if you go worldwide, then all of a sudden you have an audience. Yeah. And so you have to be able to think outside your local comic shop. Local comic shops are there to sell comics that are really mainstream, that a lot of people like. And so even if you do something that's in that vein, that doesn't mean you automatically have the audience. Marvel and DC have like 100 years almost of goodwill behind them, of them putting out comics that make people interested in buying them. It's not just that it's Batman. It's that, like, it's an expected thing. So the wider you can go, the better you're going to do with it, in my opinion.
Unfortunately, yeah. And a lot of local shops are just bleeding money.
Yeah,
they don't talk about this very often. I was talking to my local shop. I won't name them. One of them. The owner was like despondent, really depressed. I was telling her, you know, oh, hey, I want to sell some of my indie books. She's like, all right, well, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to help me, but all right. And she was telling me about how, like, just to get like good cover or rare cover books, you have to order a certain number of books of crap from Diamond.
That's what Diamond does. You get a big box to get and it's full of garbage that ends up on the discount rack.
Right.
You know, the 99
or gets thrown away. Yeah, it's very predatory. There's no symbiosis.
At least with a regular book, a novel, you know, at least with a novel, if the bookstore can't sell it, they take the jacket off and mail it back and get the deposit back. And then the publisher destroys it and claims it as a loss. Yes. So there's at least if you're running a bookstore for novels, you at least have some way to get rid of inventory that you can't get rid of.
Yeah.
You know, you can at least send back that hardback and get a little bit of money back for it. And the publisher can write it off as a loss.
Mm-hmm.
Can't really do that with comics.
I mean, when I do the consignment here, they don't pay anything to shelf the book, so it doesn't hurt them, I suppose. But the books are so expensive anyway that I don't think anyone wants to buy them.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, the other thing too is that with a lot of the crowdfunding guys in comics are just doing things the old way. And what they want to do is like, well, it's a limited release product. You know, it's that artificial rarity that they think will drive up the cost of it. Collectors like this idea because they think that they can resell their comic later on for some increased amount of money. But if you're producing the comic, that doesn't do anything for you.
No.
You want to sell as many freaking copies as possible for as long as possible. Like resale markets, you never want to cater to resale markets if you're just trying to get out there and make money.
No.
So that's another problem with the big two, is that they're catering to a market which is designed to to siphon money that they would have by going wider and printing more copies into the hands of people who buy the comic the first time around, or buy those rare cover, the cover variants. And I think they had like 25 cover variants for Batman 50, the one where he was supposed to marry Catwoman, but she didn't show up to the wedding.
Man, it's a lot of taking advantage. Everyone knows it's happening, but like, all right, so just me by myself, working by myself. I don't have any employees or teammates or anything. All the costs that go into my production or that go into my campaigns are just paying for me to sit at my desk and put in 8 to 16 hours per page, let's say. If my book is 100 pages, whatever that calculation is, it's like however many months it takes me to sit at my desk and paint these pages. It's no wonder that comics are, in stasis right now. Nobody can afford to make them. I know a lot of creators, actually writer types, who outsource their art. And this is not a slight against anyone. They have international artists who live in countries where, because of the exchange rate, it's like I can pay someone pennies and still get amazing artwork. If I was just a raw writer, why wouldn't I hire some artist from, wherever, where, $1 will pay for their entire week of labor, let's say.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I live in New Jersey, one of the most expensive states. I'm bleeding money all the time. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to sustain this business model. I'm trying, but I don't know how most people can do it.
Yeah. So this is a point. Jesse makes a point here. I noticed that the goal price, this is on crowdfunding, is set so low that people are trumpeting funded when the amount being brought in is really just a pittance. Like they have their goal set below what it would actually cost to get it done, just to say that it's funded.
Yes,
it's an artificial success. One can make more by doing spot illustrations for customers. That's a really good point. So this is something. By the way, you talk about hiring artists from like overseas. Often, I feel like they're better artists. It's not anything against anyone, but I feel like people. I mean, like if I'm looking for a cover artist, all the cover artists I've looked for, if they're not, there's a couple Americans, the very top American artists, like Howard Lyon or someone like that. But otherwise, all the artists that I look at that I'm like, man, this person would be a great cover artist. They're all from the Eastern Bloc. They're all from, like Croatia, or they're from, Czech Republic, or they're from Turkey. Karim Bayat, the guy who did this image, he's Turkish. He lives in Turkey. So for some reason, not for some reason, it has to do with our corrupted academic system. The corrupted academic system doesn't teach people how to do art anymore. That's like what it's like.
It's modern art. Man. Yeah, it's, I don't know. As an American, what can I say? It's like they are better. I can't be bitter about that. I don't know. Like maybe I should move to Southeast Asia or something. But I don't know. It's at least I can get by with, writing and drawing my own stuff. So for now it's fine, but I don't blame anyone for outsourcing.
Yeah. Commodin says, what about European comics? I grew up on Asterix and Tintin, but Italy and Spain also have cool comics. Yeah, there's a lot more European comics that I think are more interesting, a lot of different varieties versus American comics, but they're just like invisible in this market. Like no one talks about them.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of, what do you think, Blueberry? There's like a Western comic or something. Like the guy that did the art for Jodorowsky's Dune, Mobius. He did a lot of series that were amazing, but I never got a hold of them.
Yeah. I'll have to look more. I'll have to look more at that kind of stuff because I'm not European comics. I'm just really not up to snuff on. And I think that's because manga was really always the alternative to American comics. And especially, once I started reading manga, I really wasn't reading American comics anymore. By the early 2000s, there was nothing at the local comic store to remotely interest me. Even other than like, I always talk about Dark Horse. Like Dark Horse always has some weird stuff that is kind of interesting that they come out with. They are kind of like the dark horse among the publishers. And Dark Horse does a lot of the manga as well. Like they publish the English translations of a lot of the manga. But you just got things which were more interesting. Once I started reading Berserk, it was like over. It's like, what? I can actually see something that's more like Conan,
Yeah.
And there was also this, I think they brought Conan back, but there was this drought of no Conan comics for years.
I don't know. When I discovered Berserk, man, how old was I? I don't know. Like once you hit the top of the mountain, like there is no series like it. There's nothing above it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to read manga anymore after reading that stuff like that, let's say, or something like another series that blew me away was Death Note. At least the first half.
Death Note's interesting because and you can see this with the anime as well. So like the anime translation has this, is that it's it clearly was meant to end. And then they didn't end it. Like I think they're like, it's making too much money. It's like, well, I'll write another story arc. It's like there's a point, and you can do this if you want to watch the anime. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a point where that you should just that you don't need to watch anymore.
Yeah.
And it's okay to turn it off at that point.
That was always one of my biggest criticisms with especially Shonen Jump style comics. They're designed to be serialized and to go on forever. And what they would actually do is, I've spoken to the editors myself. It was interesting. I asked them. They're really designed to go on until the audience is either bored of it or the artist burns out.
Yeah.
And really, there's no other way to end a series. Like they have the ending planned from the beginning, so that if they have to abort early, they just end the series gracefully and we try again with some other series. But once it hits, you get something like One Piece, which goes on for how many hundreds of volumes, Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, those sorts of series. They go on forever. There's no ending. I don't like that. I personally, how do I explain this? I don't like being strung along. It's like a carrot on a stick.
Yeah.
I need to know that there's going to be a good ending, which like I stopped reading Berserk at one point because I realized like, wait, there is no ending. Can you just, so I decided to stop reading until it was going to end. But
I did that for a while too. Because I was just like, I'll read it again once like I know that things are going to actually go somewhere and conclude.
Right. Because every time they start a new story arc, I'm like, wait, are we just restarting the whole series now? Where's this going?
Yeah.
I felt the same way with Vagabond, if you're familiar with that.
I haven't read it.
Oh man, that's a great series too. But towards, I guess the second, I don't know, the most recent volumes, I could tell that the artist was really burnt out and he didn't know where the series was going. And you could just feel it. So I would rather read a series that's more finite.
Yeah, same. I feel the same way. That's kind of my problem with TV series. I've talked about this, like TV series. They do the same thing with American TV series. They just will have the series go on until it's not marketable, until it's not profitable to do it. And the writers leave. You have writer turnover, which reduces the quality or at least changes the tone of things.
Yes.
All the way through. It just gets worse and worse.
Oh man.
So,
I mean, look at even the Hobbit trilogy versus the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Yeah. You could tell they were stretching it.
It was awful. I can talk about that more some other time, but it had also gone through so many different hands that there was no clear vision to what was going on with that anymore either.
No, that's the same with Star Wars, of course. I mean, that's how I discovered your channel in the first place, but they had no, stupid. Kathleen Kennedy joked about this, right? We have no lore to pull from, she said once, apparently. It's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's true.
But it's like, you can't start a story. You can't start a project without inspiration. You need a map. You can't just go into the wilderness and hope for the best.
Yeah, you can't. And this is what I say to people. I'm like, okay, so most of the time when you have writer's block, it's because you don't know what's happening next. That's your problem. That's because you didn't plan well enough. Even if you really like to discovery write, if you like to write as you go and just kind of write by the seat of your pants, you should at least have the ending in mind. You should at least know what the ending is, so you can write towards the ending.
Yeah.
Like, just we're heading towards the ending that I know is happening. If you're just heading nowhere, it just ends up in kind of a, I don't know how to put it. Like, it's, have you ever seen, like a bug crawling around randomly on the ground? Like, you put a bug inside of like a dish for a lizard to eat, and he just starts going to the edges back and forth, just going nowhere, not knowing where he's going.
Yeah.
That's what it's like. Just wandering around.
I have a favorite quote from George Martin, Game of Thrones. He says architect versus gardener. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, I'll talk about this. Go ahead.
It's well, I'm sure most people know about this, but basically he says there's at least two types of writers. There's the architect who plans everything, and there's the gardener who just kind of lets the story grow into wherever it's going to go. And then you get sort of in the middle, sort of like the bonsai tree approach, where it's like, I'm going to let the story tell me where it's going, but I'm also going to guide it at the same time. And I was doing that recently, as recently as today, actually. I'm trying to write some scripts. And for instance, okay, Mary Sue, I have a tendency to write really melancholy stories, like really sad, depressing, dark stories. But for some reason, when I draw her, she's really happy character. It's a lot of fun. And the series is really lighthearted. And I'm realizing that like the script I'm writing is going in a completely different direction than apparently where these characters want to go. So I'm having to challenge myself to say like, okay, well, I know what the story is. I know her backstory, let's say. And I know what's going to happen to her, but she is the one at the wheel, and she's going to decide how she approaches. Like in the next series, she has to walk the plank, right? The pirates get her and she has to walk the plank. And it was supposed to be this whole sad thing where she's reflecting on her life and all that stuff. And I'm like, wait, and as soon as I started drawing her at the plank, she was looking at me and she made this dumb face, like she's pissed off at me. And I was like, wait, this character wants to do this. I don't know why, but to change it would be almost like dishonest. And it's interesting to see how all the plans go right out the window as soon as you start actually drawing or even writing. It's the same with writing too. It's just interesting to see how the story, the characters almost take over. Maybe it's like I'm having a conversation with my subconscious or something. But like,
yeah, sometimes what I say is like, sometimes you start drafting and you get better ideas. Yeah. And if you get better ideas when you're drafting, it's okay to pause, take a look at what you're doing, and go change your plan. And I think it's better to pause, take a look at what you're doing, and change your plan, change the outline or whatever you're doing to rewrite the outline than it is to try to force a story that you're not wanting to tell at that point. Because sometimes you have better ideas, and sometimes I do have better ideas when I'm writing. I stop and I go back and I like, I should really do this a little bit differently. That'd be better. In fact, with Eyes in the Walls, very quickly when I was writing it, I'm like, I have a better ending in mind. So I stopped, went back and rewrote a little bit what I was doing because I came up with better ideas as I was writing. Mm-hmm. And that's okay.
Oh man, I actually bought that recently. I'm really looking forward to reading it.
People are liking the ending. Both of them, all three of them, maybe. You'll see. Man. All right. So a couple things. Rusty and kind of both say that they like to think about the ending first, which is good. First thing I like to think about is the ending. I like to arrive at that point. Personally, I don't start writing until I have an idea how I want it to end. So when I started writing Muramasa, Blood Drinker, I'll tell you how this began. I begin a lot of stories like this. I just write one scene, and it's just kind of, it's just there as a scene to, just to draw the character, if you will. It's like kind of like a sketch of the character, but I do it with words. And so the first scene in the book is the first scene I wrote, and it was this samurai looking at a dead body. And as soon as I wrote that, I knew what the ending was. So I had the beginning, I had the ending, and then writing everything in the middle, coming up with everything in the middle was really easy. So I knew what the beginning was, came up with the ending. Everything else in the middle becomes really easy. You have a good beginning and a good ending. The middle stuff just becomes much easier to deal with.
Yeah, like if I'm taking a road trip between New York to LA, I can go anywhere between them.
Yeah. You know where you're starting, you know where you can take whatever roads you want to get there.
Yeah.
You can say, I don't want to go through Las Vegas. I'm going to go through Arizona.
Mm-hmm. Actually,
I don't recommend that. Go through Vegas, guys.
I've always wanted to visit the Grand Canyon and stuff, but I was reminded actually when you mentioned about your book sales. Have you ever thought of doing like audiobook stuff?
Yeah, that'll come further down the pipeline. Again, it's a cost thing, and there's two costs to consider. So, first one is I could hire a narrator, which is a big upfront cost to me, to then be kind of uncertain about the sales. Now, I could possibly crowdfund audiobooks. I hadn't really considered that. But the other thing is just the cost of time, because if I record them myself, which is probably what I prefer to do because it's $0 to record it myself. So everything that comes out at the other end is at least on paper profit.
Yeah.
That means that's time that I wouldn't spend writing another book, for instance. And so that's something I have to really consider. It's like maybe it takes, if I record 2 audiobooks, that's 1 less book I've written.
Man, that's tough.
And if my sales are high, then it's worth it. And if my sales are high, then it's worth it to just pay somebody. But if my sales aren't that high and they're not, frankly, you got to be moving a lot of books before audiobooks become super profitable, whatever you've heard about growth or whatever else. Oh, here's the big thing I wanted to talk about. So let me go ahead and drop this. Since we've been going on this for an hour and a half, we probably need to start closing up shop. Anyway, I meant to say this at the beginning. So if you stuck around for the entire stream, here's the big thing that I want to drop. There is a coming contraction in the ebook market. There's a crash coming, for if you want to use simpler terms. Contraction means it's going to shrink. There's a couple reasons for this. There's some big markers that are pointing towards this. So if you are an author, you need to be prepared for a not just saturated ebook market where it's hard to get noticed, but one that's actually going to shrink, that's going to perhaps significantly contract. Because what you're seeing a duplication of the factors which caused the video game crash of the early 1980s, which is hypersaturation of the market, no quality control, and an inability for consumers to find the products that they want. So if you're familiar with the way the video game crash happened, and George, you might be familiar too. Basically what happened is there was a whole bunch of consoles. So we have a whole bunch of e-readers. I had one here, but here's a Kindle. We have a whole bunch of e-readers, and we have a whole bunch of we have a whole bunch of different platforms, and we have one big one, which is Amazon. There's no quality control on that. So it's not like a publisher that's doing some kind of vetting before they publish something. That's not necessarily a problem, because there should be other things to help people do quality control. But Amazon has significantly changed the way it's done business over the last couple of years. It's basically all the eggs are in the Amazon basket. Like 95% of my sales come from Amazon. Amazon has gone with a thing called Kindle Unlimited, which lets people pay a subscription for books. Kindle Unlimited reduces the revenues authors collect. A lot of authors who had been doing well in Kindle Unlimited, something is going wrong there. This is something you're going to see a lot of. Money's disappearing. Revenues are way down. Where are the readers? How is this growing and yet we're all making less money? It's because it's becoming more saturated. And it's hard to get through the noise. But also, it's really hard to find books that you want to read on Amazon. Amazon has gone from a strictly algorithm-based way of presenting book choices to a pay-to-play model. If you are not paying Amazon to advertise your book, chances are no one will see it. That's a problem, because that eliminates one of the biggest parts of one of the biggest filters for quality control, which is sales. If lots of other people have bought it, that's a good indicator that lots of other people are going to like it. So their old algorithm model of where you push your book up to a high sales position and Amazon continues to recommend it to people is no longer what it was. It's a pay-to-play model. And at that point, Amazon is extracting money from authors to put their book in front of readers, and readers are not able to find the books they want to find, which means they're going to buy less of them. So you're going to see, I think you are going to see a contraction. That's my prediction. You're going to see a contraction in the ebook market, not necessarily the physical book market, but the ebook market. This does not mean that publishers are going to have a big comeback. This doesn't mean the big five are suddenly going to be out of hot water because they are publishers and therefore can move physical books and things like that. That does not mean that. I think it just means that people are going to be reading less in general, or they're going to be choosing physical books instead. So you need, I'm going to try to come up with some options for myself to hedge this potential threat to revenue. One of the things is about 40% of my sales are already physical books. Every book I come out with has a physical counterpart, and I want people to have the option of buying physical. But I don't have a whole lot of other plans beyond that. It's an opportunity maybe for some other publishers to come in, not necessarily gatekeep, but to curate the books that they're displaying for users. So users have like that Nintendo seal of quality on a book that, oh, this publisher's coming out with the book. I know it's going to be good because that publisher is a good publisher that only publishes good books. The way that we used to think about, say, Capcom or Konami back in the 90s. It's like every game Capcom came out with on the Super Nintendo was a good game. They never came out with like a bad game. You know what I mean? So that's my announcement for you guys. Take it as you will. I think all the markers are there. We have shrinking revenue, the readers are going to shrink now too. And you have a broken marketplace that's not going to allow the standard filtering mechanisms that allow people to find the fiction that they want to continue to function well. It's like a broken organ, anyway.
It seems that, I mean, in comics, right? Indie comics, for anyone listening, we're facing a similar problem where it's sort of, I hesitate to say Pareto distribution, but like there's a really, really high earning tower or pyramid, if you will, over here. And they're doing great because they have the monopoly on all the marketing. And then there's smaller guys who are struggling to sort of stand out among the crowd. So you see these little spikes of like popularity over here. So this guy's really popular. This person's a really good illustrator. So in marketing in general, I've noticed there's a huge difference between content and marketing, almost to the point where a book that's really good content-wise will not always sell well. In fact, it might not sell at all. And it has almost nothing to do with the quality of the book, but rather how it's marketed. And I'm realizing that the audience might not even be paying for the content. They're paying for the prestige of owning the content. And I'm kind of, on one hand, I'm tempted to be sad about this, but on the other hand, I'm realizing like, okay, if I'm going to fight in this ring as a creator, like, how are we going to stand out? Like you, for instance, you have an amazingly huge, like great channel with lots of loyal listeners and all that stuff. So you have an amazingly huge platform that you could take advantage of, not in a bad way. So you have a great advantage, but like a smaller guy, let's say, might be tempted to do some kind of gimmick or trick to try to jump up the ladder, but then they don't have any support structure underneath. They don't have an existing audience. So the hard truth I'm realizing is that we have to build our audience from scratch so that they recognize our names. Oh, this is a George Alexopoulos book.
Yeah.
I want to read this because I liked his other books. So creators like you and I, we gain customers by volume. Like they liked one of our books, maybe they'll check out the rest of our library. So our challenge is to get that first sale. And I think once they like our content, they'll want to read the rest of it. That's my hope for the future. I want to be hopeful. It's hard.
Well, one of the things that, I mean, you're coming out with Mary Sue #2 here.
Yeah.
What's great about this is that series are where it's at. And I need to do more series, but I break all the rules. And so I just throw a lot of crap at the wall and see what sticks. And I always have to be pushing boundaries and doing something creative and different. That's who I am. I'm not a rule follower when it comes to being creative with my art. I'm always kind of a rule breaker. And I talk about rules a lot. I'm like, here's the way that you should do things. And then I'm like, but I don't do them. I do something different. So series are great because somebody buys that first one. And this is why I would encourage any potential comic or manga artist watching this, really give some serious thought into getting out into a space where people can get your books on demand without you having to do that much, because you're going to just organically be building fans. If they buy that first one and they like it, they're going to buy that second one and the third one and the fourth one. And, maybe if it's available as a PDF or you sell it digitally, they like it. They buy the PDF for 99 cents or something for the first one. And they're like, well, this was a great, maybe I'll just buy the physical too. Yeah. A lot of times people have no problems. People like the ebook, so they collect the physical edition of whatever they're doing. Or they like number 1 for 99 cents. They'll buy the PDF for number 2 for $2.99. I think it's a good thing to pursue.
Well, you talked about the games industry. They sell consoles at cost a lot of the time, and they make profit off the games themselves. So it's sort of like the cost of entry is extra low. Like, have you ever read Console Wars?
I have not read Console Wars.
It's really, well, it's decent, but basically it's Sega versus Nintendo back in the 90s. And Sega actually undercut themselves. They gave away basically the Genesis to beat Nintendo. It's like, hey, why don't you buy this really cheap console? And then now you're stuck with it. So there was all this like loyalty that came with, oh, I own a Genesis. Well, Nintendo sucks. But what happens is that the price of entry is so low, it's a good idea to almost give away an issue 1 or 2 of a comic, let's say, or the first few chapters of a novel. And then you hook people and then they'll pay for the rest of it. It's a strategy.
Yeah. So Fantasy Fan says, notice the oversaturation has made me consider future options very carefully. We'll probably pursue publishing on an online magazine, try to gain a fringe following at least. It's not that that's a bad strategy, but what if no one wants to publish your story? What are you going to do? I've got to think about how you're going to build that following somehow. You got to just keep trying. You got to think of other ways besides that too.
I feel like anthologies might make a comeback at some point.
Yeah, I'd like to do. So I did this huge Christmas anthology that was just my stuff. I'd like to do one this year that's just got a bunch of other people's stuff in it. Maybe some black and white illustrated stuff and some Christmas stories. Just do a bunch of different stuff for December.
Because that's what Shonen Jump does, actually. They have a few whales, like Dragon Ball and One Piece. That's what everyone buys the magazines for. But then they smuggle in all these other series to ride the tailwind. So sometimes it's good to just have a magazine, let's say, with a few really high-rolling, well-known authors, and they're carrying all these other junior creators too. Yeah, I think that's a very healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, I think this is the way that you run a mall. You have, you got J.C. Penney at one end and Macy's at the other, and then all the other little shops are there too. So that's a really good idea, actually, and maybe that's something I can look into either doing or getting other publications kind of pumped up that way. Nobody in Western comics knows when to close the book on a popular character, though, because they're not the creation of artist or writer. They're an IP owned by the corporation. Yep, talked about this.
Yep.
They can't let it go. Batman will never die because Batman is money. You're printing money when you put out a Batman comic, even though no one remotely related to Batman is even alive anymore.
Yeah.
It's just a fake corporate product. And this is a good one. Have you ever thought about writing a soundtrack to one of your books? I understand it may not be profitable, but it could be a fun project. So what I may do for my next project, just to upset my readers further, because I love upsetting them by not giving them what they want, I guess, I may do another album. I may do another music album, and it would be a soundtrack to a game which doesn't exist. So it'd be like a game soundtrack, but the game doesn't exist. And that's just because I want to write a very particular kind of ambient music, kind of building on what I did with the last album. But there's no market for it. It's just something I want to do. That's me. Well, why not? I do whatever I want to do all the time.
Well, I've always thought creativity, this is cheesy. It's like romance, where it's like, it's way better to smooch someone that you really like, as opposed to sort of feeling the obligation. So that I want to read a book that someone was in agony over to write, that they needed to write it. Or I want to look at a painting that someone just like felt so inspired. I don't want to have that mechanical product when I consume, a piece of entertainment, let's say. I want it to have hurt someone,
Yeah, and I really put myself into whatever I do, and if I'm painting by the numbers, I don't want to do it. I'd rather drive a truck.
Well, that's good though, because that means the content is meaningful to you, and I would assume that. I mean, visual arts. At least I feel this way. I can tell when a painter or a artist or anything like that, even music, I can tell when they really put a lot into it. Even if it's imperfect, I like that stuff. Yeah. I feel more of a connection. Like, wow, this is really actually meaningful. It's not.
Yeah. Hardwick says their Reddit community is devoted to horror stories, and some people built up an audience for their horror books there. I would have to go on Reddit. That is a hive of scum and villainy.
I can attest.
That I don't want to deal with.
Yeah.
Because now, I mean, it's almost a meme. When somebody comes in, it's like, that's Reddit tier. That's Reddit tier cringe, bro. It's Reddit tier sophistry. And you say it to people and they get real upset because that's exactly where they learn to type like that, is from Reddit, from having bad conversations with idiots on Reddit. Midwit. It's like a hive of midwits. Midwits, if you don't know what they are, they're people of like moderate intelligence that don't realize that they're not as smart as they think they are. They're just smart enough to realize that they're not completely dumb, but they don't realize that they're not as smart as other people. They think they know more than they know.
Man,
call them midwits.
Well, there was that one instance I told you about where I accidentally got way too popular too fast, and they didn't give me permission, so they chopped me down. It was very, very unsettling. And I barely used the website since that, but it was very scary.
Yeah. All right. So this is Jesse White, by the way. It's Pursuits of a Polymath. I do recommend his channel. He just came out with another one with the competition between the Conan artists, which is great. Those are good videos. He really breaks down what's going on there. What do you think about building readership by publishing as a strip? I do this on Patreon and it's working so far. Any hazards?
Oh,
now, you've done web comics.
Yeah, I do. Or I did. It's on Webtoon. It's called Problomatic. P-R-O-B. Yeah, Problomatic as in with a hyphen in between the O. You can read it for free on Webtoon. And I've been doing it on and off for like 10 years. It's sort of a 4-panel Peanuts, Calvin and Hobbes kind of thing. Hazards. Well, it's great for building up an audience because I got on Webtoon like 2 million something views, but I unfortunately ran into a problem on Webtoon where there's what do you call it when they pick people to feature? That's a C word, catering. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They basically didn't pick me to be featured, so my comic died on the vine, unfortunately. So then I reached the end of my archive. It was like something like 550 strips. And then I realized I can't do this anymore because I don't have time. My job and my personal life got in the way. So I never ended the strip. I want to continue it. I just don't have time right now. But it's good for having and building an audience, I would say. If you have the time, I say do it.
Yeah. Well, what about doing something on your own domain rather than, because I don't know anything about Webtoon, just so you know. I have no idea what it is. I don't read comics on it, but having your own site, I don't know, Penny Arcade.
I do. It's studionnj.com, but actually I don't update it very much anymore. It's just I'm spread too thin between too many platforms. So right now I'm mostly on Twitter, actually. But yeah, someday I'd love to consolidate all this stuff and just have a website where I put all my stuff. I used to publish only on the website, but it had no growth. So I kind of abandoned it.
So I'm trying to get back into doing blogs, by the way, too, for some of those reasons. They can't kick you off the blog. They can't kick you off your own website.
I hope not.
If you can funnel readers, and so now this is if you can funnel readers to your own website, then it's going to be better because then they stick around.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think. The important thing, I think, as creators, it seems that we need people to remember that we exist. I think that's the biggest problem for new and indie creators. For some reason, it's the strangest thing to me. People have told me that they see a picture that I make and they're like, wow, I know George made that. And how do you know that? And they just know. And I think there's a certain something, maybe a signature style or something like that, or just the fact that you have your channel and that people keep coming back to it. They know your voice, they know your opinion, they respect you. I think that's probably the key to success for us, is people know that we exist and they know that they want to consume the stuff that we make. Maybe that's the golden goose. I don't know.
Yeah, you want to build fans. So this is there's another really popular YouTube channel called Computing Forever. Dave Cullen's the guy who does the channel. Yeah. It started off as a tech review channel and it's become something else. He had a book that was it's called like 1,000 True Fans or something. And he kind of figured out that what you need in order to make a living is you need 1,000 people who are your true fans. You need 1,000 people who really care about buying the stuff that you put out, buying your books, watching your videos, buying your merchandise. They're the people that are actually, it only takes 1,000. So 1,000 is a lot though, but it's not like, 100,000 or something, right? So if you can get 1,000 people who really like what you're doing, that's what you need. Also, something that Nassim Taleb has said, it's better to have 10 people on Twitter who love you than thousands who just kind of think you're okay.
I would think so.
It's better to have a few people that love you because they got your back.
There's something like the 10% rule, they say. So if I have 1,000 followers on Twitter, let's say, it's possible that 10% of them would be willing to buy a book. I heard a calculation where that's it makes more sense, but that's a way to know, like, is it time to launch a campaign? Let's say if you're making comics, do you have that? Like if 10% of your total audience across all platforms, if you told all of them about it, assume 10% of them will buy it. That's the magic number, they say.
I assume 1%.
Okay.
Because so it depends on how wide the content is. So if I'm talking to 1,000 people, it's 10%. If I'm talking to 100,000, like if I make a Star Wars video and I talk to 100,000 people, it's more like 1% will pay attention. But that 1% is big. So yeah, and it's less than 1% of people who buy my books bother to review them. And I'm really thankful for reviews. It's like 0.2% review the books. It's like if I could get that thing higher, that social proof would get up real fast, but that's the way it is, that most people read it, enjoy it, and don't care about reviewing it.
Yeah, it's almost like on YouTube where they say, don't forget to like and subscribe. Most people don't think to, but that's what,
that's what you need. Now, I will tell you, just so you guys know, I do that out of habit. I'm like, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe. Subscriptions do something kind of, YouTube will often just not tell you about videos if you subscribe to a channel. Likes don't really do anything. They disabled likes as a form of algorithm control years ago. It's just the thing at the bottom of the video now, but I do appreciate the likes. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you want to see and what you want to hear in the future. And you should also buy my new book, The Keys to Prolific Creation, which will help you design a creative process which works for you as an individual. It will allow you to consistently put out great products and just build your business. Just put out tons of stuff. That's the key. All right. We probably need to wrap it up here because we've been going 2 hours. Mary Sue from George Alexopoulos, anything else that you want to say? Take a look at some of this art.
Yeah, I would just say if you guys want to keep up on my stuff, I'm gprime85 on Twitter. And that's where I post most of my stuff these days. I also have a YouTube channel, which is my name, where I interview creators, comics creators. It's like a little NPR-ish, kind of like what we did tonight. It's just a bunch of people talking about creativity. It's pretty fun.
All right. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's probably going to be it for tonight. Last comment, writing a short film, somehow translating your writing into video form could be a good way to reach an audience. I agree. Being creative with how you present your writing can broaden your audience. All those things are good suggestions. So thinking outside of your normal medium, like doing video instead of just like, I write books and how do I get people's attention? You got to make some reason for them to pay attention to you. So anyway, thanks so much, guys. I'll see you all next time. I do appreciate it. And hope you guys will have a great one. And I guess that's about it. So see you next time.
Oh, thank you.